When people think of ancient Egypt, they imagine golden tombs and mighty pharaohs. But the real backbone of Egypt, the peasants, how did they survive the heat? Some covered themselves in mud to stay cool, others drank a beer instead of water, and a few even abandoned their homes at night for something else. Here are 15 practices Egyptian peasants adopted to survive scorching summers. Hydration with beer and water. In the relentless heat of ancient Egypt, staying hydrated was a constant struggle. Unlike today, where clean drinking water is readily available, Egyptian peasants had limited access to safe water sources. The Nile provided a steady supply, but its water was often contaminated with sediments, parasites, and bacteria. To survive the intense heat and demanding physical labour, peasants relied on two primary sources of hydration: water and beer, with beer playing a far greater role than one might expect. Egyptian peasants who lived near the Nile collected water from its banks, but without modern filtration, it could be hazardous. To minimise health risks, many people stored water in clay jars, allowing sediments to settle before drinking. The porous nature of the clay pots also kept the water cooler through natural evaporation, making it more refreshing in the heat. However, beer was the true staple of hydration for Egyptian peasants. Unlike modern beer, which is high in alcohol, Egyptian beer was a thick, porridge-like beverage made from fermented barley and emmer wheat. It had low alcohol content, making it safe to drink throughout the day without causing intoxication. More importantly, it provided essential nutrients including carbohydrates, protein and B vitamins, which helped sustain workers during long hours of labour. Peasants consumed beer daily, and it was often included as part of their wages. Large state-run building projects, such as the construction of pyramids and temples, supplied labourers with rations of bread and beer, ensuring they had enough energy and hydration to continue working. The fermentation process also helped kill harmful bacteria, making beer a safer alternative to untreated river water. This reliance on beer wasn't unique to peasants. Everyone in Egyptian society drank it, from labourers to nobles. The difference was in the quality. Peasants consumed a coarser, unfiltered version, while the wealthy enjoyed a finer, more refined brew. Even children drank a diluted form of beer, as it was considered a normal part of daily sustenance at that time. The importance of beer in Egyptian society extended beyond hydration. It was deeply intertwined into religious and cultural traditions. Temples brewed beer for offerings to the gods, and it was often included in burial goods for the afterlife, ensuring the deceased had access to nourishment even in death. Today, the idea of using fermented drinks for hydration still exists in various forms. In parts of Africa, Asia and South America, low-alcohol fermented beverages made from grains, cassava or maize are consumed for their nutritional and hydrating properties, much like ancient Egyptian beer. Sleeping on rooftops. For Egyptian peasants, surviving the scorching heat was a round-the-clock struggle. While they had ways to shield themselves from the sun during the day, nighttime brought its own challenges. The thick mud brick walls of their homes, which provided insulation, also retained heat from the day's sun, making indoor sleeping nearly unbearable. Without the luxury of grand, airy chambers like the wealthy elite, peasants turned to a simple yet effective solution: sleeping on their flat rooftops. Most peasant homes were small, one-room structures with flat roofs, designed for practicality rather than comfort. During the hottest months, many families would carry mats, woven blankets, or simple linen sheets to their rooftops, where they could sleep under the open night sky. Unlike the stifling interiors of their homes, rooftops offered cooler temperatures, better ventilation, and most importantly, access to the night breeze that swept across the Nile Valley. This practice was particularly common in farming villages, where homes were closely packed together, creating a shared sense of security even when sleeping outdoors. Families often slept side by side, taking advantage of the slightly cooler air that descended at night. In cities or settlements near the Nile, the effect was even greater, as the river helped moderate nighttime temperatures. Sleeping on rooftops wasn't just about comfort, it was about maintaining strength and energy for the next day's labour. Without adequate rest, peasants risked exhaustion, dehydration, and weakened immunity, all of which could affect their ability to work in the fields, transport goods, or contribute to construction projects. Foremen overseeing major building works, such as temples and tombs, allowed labourers to sleep outside whenever possible, recognising that better rest meant higher productivity. This method of cooling was not unique to ancient Egypt. It has persisted in hot regions across the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia for centuries. Even today, in some traditional villages, people still sleep on rooftops or in open courtyards during the summer months, just as Egyptian peasants did thousands of years ago. Use of papyrus mats. Papyrus, a plant that grew along the banks of the Nile, was widely used for writing, basket weaving, boat making, and even primitive cooling methods. Peasants would cut and weave strips of papyrus into mats, which could then be soaked in water and hung at entrances to allow breezes to pass through. As the wind blew against the wet surface, the process of evaporation absorbed heat from the air, creating a cooling effect inside homes and workspaces. In the sweltering heat of ancient Egypt, where temperatures regularly soared beyond what was comfortable for human endurance, peasants had to be resourceful in their fight against the relentless sun. With no access to elaborate palaces, shaded courtyards, or the luxury of large water pools, they turned to simple yet ingenious methods to keep their homes and workplaces cool. One such technique involved hanging dampened papyrus mats in doorways and windows using the natural process of evaporative cooling to regulate indoor temperatures. This method was especially important in homes built with small openings, as it allowed for some air circulation without letting in excessive heat. It was also used in workshops and storage areas, where keeping the temperature down was essential for preserving food, maintaining pottery quality, and making labour conditions slightly more bearable. Labourers who worked in extreme heat, such as stone cutters, brickmakers, and potters, sometimes set up shaded areas with damp mats to create cooler spaces where they could rest and regain their strength. The simplicity and effectiveness of this method ensured its widespread use across Egyptian society. Since papyrus was abundant and water was readily available near the Nile, it became an accessible solution even for the poorest peasants. This technique was particularly useful during the hottest months, when the sun was at its peak and working conditions became almost unbearable. Today, the principles of evaporative cooling remain widely used in hot climates. In regions such as North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of India, people continue to hang wet fabric or place damp reed mats in open windows to cool their homes. Modern swamp coolers and misting fans are built on the same concept, using water evaporation to lower indoor temperatures without relying on energy-consuming air conditioning. Whitewashed walls. While the thick mud brick walls provided insulation, Egyptian peasants also employed another crucial technique to combat the intense summer heat: whitewashing their walls. This simple yet highly effective practice helped keep their homes cool by reflecting sunlight instead of absorbing it, reducing the overall heat that entered their living spaces. Whitewashing involved coating exterior walls with a mixture of crushed limestone, gypsum, or chalk, which, when dried, created a bright, reflective surface. The science behind this method was simple but effective. Lighter coloured surfaces reflect solar radiation, whereas darker surfaces absorb it. By applying a white or light-coloured coating to their mud brick homes, peasants significantly reduced the amount of heat their homes absorbed during the day. This technique was particularly important for those living in open desert areas, where the sun was at its most unforgiving. Peasants who worked long hours in irrigation fields, quarries or construction sites needed a home that would provide even a small but critical temperature difference from the extreme outdoor heat. Since their homes lacked the architectural luxuries of the noble class, such as stone columns, shaded courtyards and large storage rooms for cool air circulation, they had to rely on methods like whitewashing to improve their living conditions. Whitewashing was also a low-cost, accessible solution. Limestone was abundant in Egypt, particularly near the Nile Valley, making it easy for even the poorest peasants to create the mixture needed for whitewashing. It required little maintenance, as a fresh layer could easily be applied if the coating faded over time. This made it an ideal long-term strategy for staying cool in the Egyptian heat. Beyond its practical benefits, whitewashing was deeply embedded in Egyptian culture and aesthetics. Many temples, tombs, and even statues were coated with white or light-coloured finishes, reinforcing the belief that these colours represented purity, protection, and divine favour. This cultural significance may have encouraged peasants to whitewash their homes not only for cooling purposes, but also for spiritual or ritualistic reasons. The concept of whitewashing as a cooling mechanism has stood the test of time. Even today, whitewashed buildings are common in many sun-exposed regions, including the Mediterranean, North Africa, and parts of the Middle East. In countries like Greece, Morocco, and Spain, entire villages are painted white to maintain cooler indoor temperatures without relying on modern cooling technology. Mud brick housing. Unlike stone structures that absorbed and retained heat, mud brick homes were naturally cooling due to their unique thermal properties. The bricks, made from Nile silt, clay, sand, and chopped straw, were mixed with water and moulded into rectangular blocks. These were then left to dry under the sun until they hardened into durable, lightweight building materials. Peasants used these bricks to construct thick-walled homes that could withstand both the scorching summer heat and the occasional cool nights of the desert. Life in ancient Egypt was a constant battle against the heat, especially for peasants who toiled under the sun with little respite. Unlike the wealthy elite, who enjoyed shaded courtyards and grand limestone palaces, peasants had to construct their own homes using the most accessible materials, mud and straw. Though simple in design, these mud brick houses provided a crucial form of protection against the harsh desert climate, offering insulation that helped regulate temperatures throughout the day. One of the most remarkable features of these homes was their ability to maintain a stable indoor temperature. During the day, the thick mud brick walls absorbed heat slowly, preventing the interior from becoming unbearably hot. At night, when the temperatures dropped, the stored heat was gradually released back into the environment, keeping the house comfortably warm. This natural form of temperature regulation allowed peasants to rest and recover after long hours of field labour or construction work. Most peasant homes were small, single-room dwellings with few windows, designed to limit the entry of hot air while allowing ventilation through strategically placed openings. Some homes had flat rooftops, which provided an additional cooling benefit. At night, many families would sleep on their rooftops to take advantage of the refreshing night breeze. This practice was especially common during the hottest months, when indoor sleeping became uncomfortable. Beyond being a cooling mechanism, mud brick construction was also practical and economical. Peasants could easily repair or rebuild damaged walls using the same materials, ensuring that their homes remained sturdy with minimal cost. These structures were also used in temples, workshops, and storage facilities, proving their effectiveness in a variety of settings. Mud plaster coatings. Ancient Egyptian peasants had to work with nature, not against it, to survive the relentless heat. While their homes were built from mud bricks, which provided some insulation, they still had to find ways to prevent the sun from baking their houses like an oven. Their solution? Mud plaster coatings, an extra layer of protection that helped regulate temperature, minimize heat absorption, and provide a cooler indoor environment. Unlike the grand stone temples and palaces of the elite, peasant homes were simple, single-room structures made from sun-dried mud bricks. These bricks were effective at insulation, but could still absorb and retain heat during the day, making the interior hot and uncomfortable, especially in the summer months. To counteract this, peasants applied a thick coating of mud plaster, a mixture of clay, sand, straw, and water, to the exterior and sometimes interior walls of their homes. The mud plaster created an additional protective barrier, preventing direct sunlight from overheating the bricks. This helped keep the inside of the home cooler for longer periods, as the mud coating acted as a heat buffer, slowing down the warming process during the day and gradually releasing stored heat at night when temperatures dropped. Some peasants even went a step further by mixing crushed limestone or gypsum into the mud plaster, creating a form of primitive whitewashing. This technique reflected sunlight away from the house, reducing heat absorption even more. Combined with roof ventilation and shaded courtyards, these mud-coated homes became a crucial part of surviving Egypt's punishing summers. For peasants who spent their days labouring under the sun, ploughing fields, transporting goods, or working on massive construction projects, coming home to a cooler indoor space provided much-needed relief. This wasn't just about comfort, it was about maintaining health and energy levels for the next day's work. Without this technique, homes would trap unbearable heat, making sleep and rest nearly impossible. The use of mud plaster wasn't limited to homes. Peasants coated granaries, storage rooms, and even workshops to protect food supplies and maintain a stable environment for pottery and tools. Over time, this method became a standard practice in Egyptian village construction, proving that even the simplest materials could be used in ingenious ways to counteract extreme heat. Roof ventilation. While thick mud brick walls and evaporative cooling methods helped insulate Egyptian peasant homes, another crucial architectural adaptation was roof ventilation. Without proper air circulation, the heat trapped inside small homes could become unbearable, turning them into stifling ovens by midday. To combat this, peasants used open-roof kitchens and strategically placed ventilation openings to allow hot air to rise and escape, while cooler air flowed in. Most peasant homes in ancient Egypt had flat rooftops, which not only served as sleeping areas at night, but also played a role in passive cooling. Some structures featured partially open-roofed kitchens or ventilation gaps near the ceiling, allowing rising hot air to escape while keeping indoor temperatures slightly cooler. Since heat naturally rises, these openings provided a simple yet effective way to improve airflow and prevent excessive heat buildup inside homes. This ventilation technique was especially important for peasants working in extreme conditions, such as farmers tending to crops, labourers hauling stones, and irrigation workers maintaining water channels. After hours in the scorching sun, they needed a place to recover from heat exhaustion without being trapped in a suffocating indoor space. Beyond individual homes, workshops and storage areas also relied on ventilation techniques to prevent food spoilage and keep materials from becoming damaged by excessive heat. Markets and communal gathering spaces sometimes had thatched roofs or perforated walls, which encouraged natural airflow while providing shade. Courtyards with water features. Courtyards were an essential feature of many peasant homes, not only for cooling, but also for practical daily activities. Families used these outdoor spaces to cook, rest, and gather after long hours of work. Since peasant homes were typically small, single-room structures, having a semi-open area where air could circulate freely was critical for preventing indoor spaces from becoming stiflingly hot. For ancient Egyptian peasants, Surviving the brutal summer heat required not only practical materials, but also strategic home design. While their simple mud brick houses provided insulation, another architectural technique helped regulate temperatures even further: courtyards with water features. By using small basins, simple fountains, or even wet clay pots, peasants could create a primitive yet highly effective evaporative cooling system that made their homes more bearable during the hottest months. The cooling properties of water also extended beyond homes. Public wells and irrigation channels served as gathering places where peasants could refresh themselves while tending to agricultural duties. Temple courtyards and larger estates sometimes incorporated small ponds or shaded gardens, demonstrating that the cooling benefits of water were recognized across all levels of society. This ancient cooling method remains relevant even today. Modern cities in Egypt, North Africa, and the Middle East still incorporate courtyards with fountains and shaded pools in homes, palaces, and public spaces. Timing of work. For ancient Egyptian peasants, the scorching midday sun was their greatest adversary. Unlike the wealthy elite who could afford to stay in shaded palaces during the hottest hours of the day, labourers had no choice but to adapt their work schedules to survive. To avoid the worst of the heat, peasant workers structured their daily routines around the movement of the sun, ensuring that the most physically demanding tasks were done when temperatures were at their lowest. A typical workday for Egyptian peasants began before sunrise. Farmers, builders, and labourers would wake while the air was still cool, gathering their tools and preparing for the long day ahead. By sunrise, they were already in the fields, quarries, or construction sites, making the most of the early morning hours before the heat became unbearable. The most intensive labour, ploughing, planting, harvesting, or hauling stones for temples and pyramids, was often completed before midday. As the sun climbed higher, temperatures soared, making continued exertion dangerous. Peasants knew from experience that working in the midday sun could lead to heat exhaustion, dehydration, and even death, so most would retreat to shaded areas or their homes for rest during the hottest part of the day. Around late afternoon, when the sun's intensity began to wane, workers resumed their tasks, continuing until sunset. This allowed them to complete their duties while avoiding the extreme heat that dominated the midday hours. This system wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival and productivity. Egyptian peasants relied on their physical endurance to sustain their livelihoods. If they became too weak or sick from heat exposure, they risked losing their ability to work, feed their families, or pay their taxes. Foremen and supervisors overseeing large-scale construction projects, such as the building of pyramids, temples, and irrigation systems, understood the risks and often structured shifts to prevent mass heat exhaustion among workers. Shade from vegetation. With no escape from the relentless Egyptian sun, shade became one of the most valuable resources for survival. Unlike the wealthier classes, who could afford stone courtyards, large awnings, and shaded gardens, Egyptian peasants had to find or create their own forms of shelter during the hottest hours of the day. The simplest and most natural way to do this was by seeking shade under trees, or constructing temporary reed shelters near their work areas. Vegetation was scarce in much of Egypt's arid landscape, but along the Nile's fertile banks, palm trees, acacia, sycamore and tamarisk trees provided pockets of shade where labourers could briefly rest and cool down. Farmers working near the river would pause under these trees during the midday sun, allowing their bodies to recover before continuing with their tasks. In more barren areas where trees were unavailable, workers often built makeshift reed or papyrus shelters, using natural materials to create simple, sun-blocking structures that were lightweight, portable, and effective. These shade techniques were essential for those involved in physically demanding work. Irrigation workers, who were responsible for maintaining water channels and shadufs, often stationed themselves near shaded areas to avoid prolonged exposure. Similarly, stonecutters and construction workers would take refuge behind large limestone blocks, using the shadows cast by their own work sites to protect themselves during short breaks. Market vendors and traders also made use of shade, setting up their stalls under reed-covered awnings to keep their goods from spoiling in the heat. In some cases, entire village areas were designed to take advantage of natural wind patterns and shaded communal spaces, ensuring that people could conduct daily activities without constantly battling the sun. Even in religious and ceremonial settings, shade played an important role. Temples and sacred sites often included large trees or shaded entryways, where priests, pilgrims, and even labourers could gather and perform rituals without the oppressive heat draining their energy. The ancient Egyptians understood that prolonged exposure to extreme heat could be dangerous, and they adapted their surroundings accordingly. Use of shadufs. A shaduf was a long wooden beam balanced on a central pivot. On one end, it had a counterweight, usually a stone or lump of clay, and on the other, a bucket or skin bag used to scoop water. By pulling the beam down, peasants could lower the bucket into the water, then let the counterweight help lift it back up, reducing the strain of carrying heavy loads manually. In the brutal heat of ancient Egypt, water was the key to life, but for peasants it wasn't always easy to access. They didn't have the luxury of shaded pools or elaborate irrigation systems like the elite. Instead, they relied on a simple yet ingenious tool, the shaduf, to lift water from the Nile and nearby canals. This hand-operated device not only helped them irrigate their fields, but also played a crucial role in cooling their surroundings, providing relief from the relentless sun. The water collected with a shaduf was primarily used for irrigation, allowing farmers to hydrate their crops without waiting for the annual Nile flood. But it also served another essential function, cooling the air and ground. Peasants often poured water around their homes, courtyards and work areas, which lowered temperatures through evaporation. This was one of the few ways they could create pockets of relief from the desert heat. For Egyptian peasants, the shaduf was a lifeline. Unlike the nobility, who had large wells or servants to fetch water, labourers had to rely on their own strength and tools to access this precious resource. The ability to lift water quickly and efficiently meant they could keep themselves, their homes, and even their animals cool during the hottest months. Workers in markets and workshops also used shadufs to pull water into storage basins, keeping goods from overheating and creating a slightly cooler environment for trade and labour. Even construction workers, who hauled massive stones for temples and pyramids, benefited from nearby wet pathways that reduced dust and heat buildup. The principles behind the shaduf are still used today. Across Egypt, Sudan and parts of India, hand-operated water lifting devices help farmers irrigate small plots without the need for modern pumps. Lightweight linen clothing. Working in the open sun was unavoidable for Egyptian peasants. Farmers, fishermen, builders and transporters spent long hours under the blazing sky, enduring intense heat that could easily lead to dehydration, heat exhaustion and even death. While access to shade was limited, the way they dressed played a crucial role in helping them stay cool and protected from the harsh environment. Linen, the lightest and most breathable fabric available, became their primary defense against the heat. Linen was made from flax, a plant cultivated in the fertile lands along the Nile. After being harvested, soaked, beaten and woven into fine fabric, it produced a lightweight, airy material that allowed the skin to breathe. Egyptian peasants wore loose-fitting linen garments, which not only provided protection from the sun, but also encouraged airflow,